Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with Book 2, Stanza 2, Nature Unaided Fails. We're going to go ahead and read the heading here, even though we'll be going through it. So, 5. After enormous periods, the earth creates monsters. 6. The creators are displeased. 7. They dry the earth. 8. The forms are destroyed by them. 9. The first great tides. And 10. The beginning of incrustation. 5. The wheel whirled for 30 crores of years, or 300 million. Footnote 1. 300 million years, or 3 occult ages. The Rig Veda has the same division. I'm sure that is entirely coincidental. In the Physician's Hymn, it is said that the plants came into being 3 ages, Triyugam, before the gods on our earth. See Chronology of the Brahmins at the end of this stanza. The wheel well for 30 crores, it constructed rupas, forms, soft stones that hardened, minerals, hard plants that softened, vegetation, visible from invisible, insects and small lives, saris, ripa, swarapa. She, the earth, shook them off her back whenever they overran their mother. After 30 crores of years she turned round, she laid on her back, on her side. She would call no sons of heaven, she would ask no sons of wisdom. She created from her own bosom, she evolved watermen, terrible and bad. It is important to remember that all of these creation stories, it doesn't matter which source material it is speculation. Nobody was actually here to write down at the moment of it happening, right? These are things that people have speculated about. That is important to remember. A. This relates to an inclination of the axis, of which there were several, to a consequent deluge and chaos on earth, having, however, no reference to primeval chaos, in which monsters, half human, half animal, were generated. We find it mentioned in the Book of the Dead and also in the Chaldean account of creation on the Kutha tablets, however mutilated. Now, this is going to play into something that I already believe. We have talked about it several times. We will continue talking about it. The 12,000 year disaster cycle, and it will be linked in the corner above. There is a theory that the earth turns, right? Not in the normal way, but on its polar axis, right? The north and the south pole alternate between being at the equator and being in their current location. This is speculation, but it is based upon several different scientific theories being meshed together. Again, the 12,000 year disaster cycle is where I explain in great detail how that works and use other people as source material, the people who are actually doing the work, to point out the scientific parts of it, right? The electromagnetic stasis and the catalyst events and all of that is better explained by them, so I let them do that, right? That is why I point back to this video so very often. But this leans into that, right? This is an inclination of the axis, of which there were several, to a consequent deluge and chaos on earth. Now, I believe that this cycle has 2 different keys, right? One is a hot one is a wet one. The hot one is gigantic plasmic discharges in accompaniment with droughts and things of that nature. It gets really, really dry, and then we have these electromagnetic discharges that change the face of the planet. And the other half of that, right? It is 12,000 years, and then 6,000 years after that, there is the wet event, which is the flood, a deluge. And then 6,000 years after that is another hot event. It is alternating. There are reasons for it, 12,000 year disaster cycle. We are at the point where it will be a hot one when it pops up again, and I do believe it will pop up again. And so this is leaning into that, right? The consequent deluge, the inclination of the axis, the fact that there were several, all of these things lean into what I already believe. So I just want to acknowledge my confirmation bias and this as a confirmation. And the fact that it is mentioned in the Book of the Dead and the Chaldean account of creation, which we have not read, or the Kutha tablets, which we again have not yet read, just leans into it even more, right? Because my account begins, right? The belief of the 12,000 year disaster cycle begins with Plato. It begins with the account as it is recorded in, I can never remember, I think it's Timaeus, but Critias or Timaeus, which is part of the ancient lore playlist, where they talk about Atlantis, where they talk about this cycle and how it has been recorded and how it is through history that we know it will happen. And so the Book of the Dead for sure is directly related to where this source material would come from. The Chaldeans are right down the street, and I'm not sure where the Kutha tablets are, so that's possibly in the same region. All right, back to the text. It is not even allegory. Here we have facts. They are found repeated in the account of Pymander, as well as in the Chaldean tablets of creation. The verses may almost be checked by the cosmogony as given by Berosus, which has been disfigured out of recognition by Eusebius, but some of the features of which may yet be found in fragments left by ancient Greek authors, Apollodorus, Alexander Polyhistor, etc., etc. The Wata men, terrible and bad, who were the production of physical nature alone, a result of the evolutionary impulse, and the first attempt to create man, the crown, and the aim and goal of all animal life on earth, are shown to be failures in our stanza. Do we not find the same in the Berosian cosmogony, denounced with such vehemence as the culmination of heathen absurdity? And yet, who of the evolutionists can say that things in the beginning have not come to pass as they are described? That, as maintained in the Puranas, the Egyptian and Chaldean fragments, and even in Genesis, there have not been two, or even more, creations before the last formation of the globe. That, as maintained in the Puranas, the Egyptian and Chaldean fragments, and even in Genesis, there have not been two and even more creations before the last formation of the globe, which, changing its geological and atmospheric conditions, changed also its flora, its fauna, and its men. This claim agrees not only with every ancient cosmogony, but also with modern science, and even, to a certain degree, with the theory of evolution as may be demonstrated in a few words. Now, this is saying that the planet was created, but the beings on the planet have changed. And yes, right, I was reading it wrong. That's why I had to go back and read it again. Yes, that has happened, right? The saurians, the dinosaurs, the various stages of evolutionary history. Right now, I don't believe in macroevolution. I believe in microevolution for various reasons that have been outlined previously. So I'm not going to dive into it again today, since it was like yesterday that we did the other one. But there have been different periods of population and different beings populating. Right? Some of those were dinosaurs. That is a veritable certainty. Now, that was an exceedingly long period of time ago, but I do not believe that we came from the same source as those dinosaurs. There is no dark creation, no evil dragon, conquered by a sun god in the earliest world cosmogonies. Even with the Akkads, the great deep, the watery abyss, or space, was the birthplace and abode of Yah, wisdom, the incognizable, infinite deity. But with the Semites and the later Chaldeans, the fathomless deep of wisdom becomes gross matter, sinful substance, and Yah is changed into Tiamat, the dragon slain by Merodach, or Satan, in the astral waves. Now, I do have these unconventional beliefs, and as part of the 12,000 year disaster cycle, I do believe that there will be a sign in the sky. Now, to me, this sign in the sky is not a living dragon, but it is what was mistaken as a dragon, right? The fiery dragon of old in the sky, which portends the change of the world. This dark creation, this evil dragon, is a literal sign in the heavens. Now, whether that is a comet on a return, or whether it is an asteroid about to penetrate, or whether it is the sun ejecting things from it, is up to debate. But it is most likely whatever it is that portends the change of the 12,000 year disaster cycle, being described as a dragon because it is long and sinuous, and we can see it in the skies, both in the daylight and in the dark. That, I believe, is the reason for this sky dragon that is so common in mythology. This dragon that was slain by the light bringer could very well be a cometoid being struck by the sun. That's not to say that it absolutely is, but that is definitely an explanation that would make sense, right? If there was an extrasolar body that entered into our solar system, there is a good chance that it would be affected by the sun, particularly if it got close. Now, this could also be, as part of the 12,000 year disaster cycle, Ben Davidson and several others have a theory that there will be an accumulation on the sun, and after the accumulation, during the grand solar minimum, there will be an explosion, and giant chunks of the accumulated material will be cast off into space. If so, what would be visible to us? The sun, and then something leaving the sun that looks like a long form. Now, whether it is sinuous and it moves, that is up for debate, but both of those can be an explanation for this dragon. It doesn't have to be some beast, right? And that is where people get caught up in their head. This is something that is like nothing that is on the earth, so it is described differently. Back to the text. In the Hindu Puranas, Brahma, the creator, is seen recommencing de novo several creations after as many failures. And two great creations are mentioned. Footnote. These two must not be confused with the 7 creations or divisions in each kalpa. The primary and secondary creations are here meant. The Padma and the Varaha, the present, when the earth was lifted out of the water by Brahma in the shape of a boar, or Varaha Avatar. Creation is shown as a sport, an amusement, Leela, of the creative God. The Zohar speaks of primordial worlds which perished as soon as they came into existence, and the same is said in the Midrash. Rabbi Abahu explaining distinctly in Bereshith Rabbah that the Holy One had successively created and destroyed sundry worlds before he succeeded in the present one. This does not relate only to other worlds in space, but to a mystery of our own globe contained in the allegory about the kings of Edom. For the words, "This one pleases me," are repeated in Genesis 1:31, though in disfigured terms as usual. The Chaldean fragments of cosmogony on the cuneiform inscriptions and elsewhere show 2 distinct creations of animals and men, the first being destroyed as it was a failure. The cosmogonical tablets prove that this, our actual creation, was preceded by others, and, as shown by the author of the Kabbalah in the Zohar, Sifra Dzenoita in Yovel Rabbah 128a, etc., etc., the Kabbalah states the same. B. Oannes, or Dagon, the Chaldean manfish, divides his cosmogony in Genesis into two portions. First, the abyss of waters and darkness, wherein resided most hideous beings. Men with wings, 4 and 2-faced men. Human beings with 2 heads and the legs and horns of a goat are goat men. Footnote. Whence the identity of the ideas. The Chinese have the same traditions. According to the commentator, Kuo Pao, in the work called Shan Hai King, Wonders by Sea and Land, a work which was written by the historiographer Zhong Gu from engravings on 9 urns made by the Emperor Yu, BC 2255. An interview is mentioned with men having 2 distinct faces on their heads, before and behind, monsters with bodies of goats and human faces, etc. Gould, in his Mythical Monsters, giving the names of some authors on natural history, mentions Shan Hai King. According to Kuo Pao, this work was compiled 3,000 years before his time, or at 7 dynasties distance. Yang Sung of the Ming Dynasty, commencing AD 1368, states that it was compiled by Kung Jia and Chung Ku, as stated above. Chung Ku, at the time of the last emperor of the Haya Dynasty, BC 1818, fearing that the emperor might destroy the books treating of the ancient time, carried them in his flight to Yin. See Mythical Monsters by C. Gould. The horns of a goat are goat men, hippocentaurs, bulls with the heads of men, and dogs with tails of fishes. In short, combinations of various animals and men, of fishes, reptiles, and other monstrous animals, assuming each other's shapes and countenances. The feminine element they resided in is personified by Thalath, the sea or water, which was finally conquered by Belus, the male principle. And Polyhistor says, Belus came and cut the woman asunder, and of one half of her he formed the earth, and of the other half the heavens, and at the same time he destroyed the animals within her. As pertinently remarked by I. Meyer, with the Akkadians, each object and power of nature had its Z, spirit. The Akkadians formed their deities into triads, usually males, sexless rather. The Semites also had triadic deities, but introduced sex, or phallicism. With the Aryans and the earliest Akkadians, all things are emanations, though, through, not by, a creator or logos. With the Semites, everything is begotten. 6. The water men, terrible and bad, she herself created, from the remains of others, from the mineral, vegetable, and animal remains. From the first, second, and third rounds, she formed them. The Dhyani came and looked, the Dhyani, from the bright father-mother, from the white, solar-lunar, regions they came, from the abodes of the immortal mortals. Footnote on let's see. Gods and planetary spirits, especially the Ripus, the 3 Ripus, who yet become thrice 7 in number of their gifts. It is entirely possible, right? My theory on evolution is that there was a cosmic event that spurred the changes as opposed to natural selection. What does that mean? There is no biological imperative for you to lose hair, as if we came from the great apes or any of the primate families, they're all covered in hair, right? There is no biological imperative by which you lose your hair through natural selection, right? Even today, if you're bald, it's a lot harder to get laid, right? It's just one of those physicalities. And so it is extremely unlikely that a female seeing a male with no hair would choose to copulate with it, right? It doesn't look like the same species. It's not going to try. But if there were an event that caused these sudden changes in the genetic code, then that would happen to several different species at the same time. Just because we evolved into this, if that is what happened from this event, doesn't mean that every other evolution that would be caused by that event would necessarily result in the same thing. Right? So if there were, for instance, a genetic mutation inside of a bull, maybe it made it a minotaur. Maybe that is where that legend came from, that these bulls were changed into this other thing in much the same way that we might have been changed from a simian into a sapien. Right? These are possibilities. I don't say that it is absolute because, for one, you can't prove it. It is not the fact. Right? If you can speculate upon it, doesn't make it a fact. But if that theory were correct, then this would play right into that. Right? There was this thing that happened, and it caused these watermen to be formed in non-perfect ways. Now, that could be the Naga, right? That could be the Murlocs from World of Warcraft. We don't know. What we do know is that there are a lot of legends of monstrous creatures from our antiquity, right? Minotaurs being one, centaurs being another one, mermaids being a third, right? Various creatures of myth. Now, we have always attributed that those things did not exist, but what if we just hunted them into extinction back in the days of prehistory? Right? And there were some remnants that made it into the times when we were actually recording history. And so when we fought the Minotaur in the labyrinth, right, maybe that was just the last Minotaur. Again, speculation, but something that could be. Right? And so I'm just putting it out there as an opportunity. This does, again, play into what I already believe. And so in order to battle the confirmation bias, I point out where I see myself being confirmed. Does not mean that it is necessarily the way that it went. Back to the text. The explanations given in our stanzas are far more clear than that which the legend of creation from the Kutha tablet would give, even were it complete. What is preserved on it, however, corroborates them. For in the tablet, the Lord of the Angels destroys the men in the abyss, when there were not left the carcasses and waste, after they were slaughtered. After which they, the great gods, create men with the bodies of birds, of the desert, human beings, 7 kings, brothers of the same family, etc., which is a reference to the locomotive qualities of the primary ethereal bodies of men, which could fly as well as they could walk. Well, there's an extrapolation. Footnote 2. Remember the winged races of Plato and the Popol Vuh accounts of the first human race, which could walk, fly, and see objects, however distant. Now, I have dealt, not fully, but somewhat extensively, with Plato. I don't remember the winged races. It is entirely possible that I covered it. I really don't believe so, but it's probably part of one of the discussions that we did not cover yet. If you know the reference for these, drop that in the comments for me, please, so that I can look that up. I will forget it. Who could fly as well as they could walk, but who were destroyed because they were not perfect. In example, they were sexless, like the kings of Edom. And again, right, this is one of those things that is contradictory. These kings of Edom are the Anak, the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, the various ways of describing them. They weren't sexless. These were the same people that saw the women and were enamored of them and took them for their wives and created the races of giants. I mean, that is, as far as I am aware, who is being referred to here. And so they weren't sexless. They were literally having sex with humans. Back to the text. Weeded of metaphors and allegories, what will science say to this idea of a primordial creation of the species? It will object to the angels and spirits having anything to do therewith. But if it is nature and the physical law of evolution that are the creators of all there is now on earth, why could there be no such abyss when the globe was covered with waters, in which numbers of monstrous beings were generated? Is it the human beings and animals with human heads and double faces which are a point of the objection? But if man is only a higher animal and has evolved from the brute species by an infinite series of transformations, why could not the missing links have had human heads attached to the bodies of animals? Or, being two-headed, have heads of beasts, and vice versa, in nature's early efforts? Now, again, this goes into what I believe about the evolutionary process. Not necessarily that they had to come from humans, right? It could be a genetic mutation of a lion. It could be a genetic mutation of a amphibian, anything. It does not have to be formed into us. If we got our man-like things from this evolution, maybe they got some man-like things from theirs, and they didn't quite make it. But here's one thing that we do know, right? There are, as far as we are aware, absolutely zero skeletal remains of a animal with a human head or a human with an animal head. We have zero fossil remains. We have zero burial sites. We have zero depictions even of it being a common occurrence. We have myths, we have legends of these things existing, but we do not have any skeletal remains whatsoever. We don't have anything in the fossil record despite our somewhat extensive looking. Right now, that is not to say that it could not have been hidden. Right? The Vatican and the Smithsonian hide information like it's nobody's business. And if it pops up and it is a little bit outside of the ordinary, it disappears. That is a repeated pattern through history. And so it is entirely possible that, much like the giants, these remains were disappeared. If so, I am unaware of them, right? I am aware of several of the giants. I am aware of the interference of the Smithsonian and the Vatican through reports about giants, but not about these hybrids. And so I don't dismiss, but I do not put countenance behind these particular things. It is entirely possible that there will be a fossil remain that we find that is, but we have not. And until we do, it remains in the realm of speculation. Now, again, I believe that this is possible. I believe that it is likely even, but it still has to remain in speculation. Back to the text. Are we not shown during the geological periods, in the ages of the reptiles and the mammalia, lizards with birds' wings, and serpents' heads on animal bodies? That would be dinosaurs. See Mythical Monsters by Charles Gould is the footnote. And, arguing from the standpoint of science, does not even our modern human race occasionally furnish us with monster specimens? Two-headed children, animal bodies with human heads, dog-headed babies, etc., etc. No. Right? As far as I am aware, every single instance of these particular things. Now, two-headed, yes, that is a thing. Right? That is a genetic mutation, generally from the incomplete absorption of a twin in gestation. That is a possibility. Right? Animal bodies with human heads and dog-headed babies, however, there are, as far as I am aware, zero credible references. Now, in the 1800s, this was 1888, yes, there was all kinds of wild speculation going on. Even as far, like when I was growing up as a child, the National Enquirer at least once a year had a dog-headed baby. But every single instance of that was a fabrication. Right? As far as I am aware, we have not had this with with one possible notable exception to this, right? Now, if you're not aware, I'm going to give you some deep lore. In the state of Louisiana, it is against the law to sleep with animals, but it is against the law in one specific instance to the extreme. And that is a sheep. You want to know why? Do you want to know why? Because you can get a sheep pregnant, and a sheep can get you pregnant. Now, it can't do it if you're a male, right? And so there may be instances of goat babies or sheep babies. Goats and sheep are different. Sheep are near enough to humans that the reproduction will actually take. And so it is especially against the law here in my state to have sex with a goat or a sheep. For that reason, right? You can impregnate a sheep. As far as I am aware, right? This was why the law was written. I have not done the genetics research to verify this, so it is somewhat speculation, but when I was researching the law on this, because I found it funny that it was against the law to have sex with sheep in particular, that's the reasoning behind it, is because somebody did actually impregnate a sheep, as far as it was reported. And so that's a possibility. Now, dogs, no, right? Those are completely incompatible, at least as far as I am aware. Doesn't mean that people haven't tried, right? We know that there are some wild people out there doing some wild things that should not be done. I do not in any way, shape, or form condone bestiality at all. But that is the only way that this is going to be a possibility, right? If somebody did have sex with a sheep, then they could have a human body with an animal head or an animal body with a human head. But outside of that, I am unaware of any way that that could possibly be. And as far as I am aware, that has not happened as an occurrence. So, back to the text. And this proves that if nature will still play such freaks now, that she has settled for ages into the order of her evolutionary work, monsters, like those described by Barossus, were a possibility in her opening program, which possibility may have existed once upon a time as a law, before she sorted out her species and began regular work upon them, which indeed now admits of definite proof by the bare fact of reversion, as science puts it. Now, I do also want to point out that if this is guided evolution by a divine being, such as a Diane Kohan, right? Then how do they mess up, right? How do they get these amalgamations that did not work? If they were indeed divine elemental forces. I'm just saying, that doesn't make sense. This is what the doctrine teaches and demonstrates by numerous proofs. But we shall not wait for the approval of either dogmatic theology or materialistic science, but proceed with the stanzas. Let these speak for themselves with the help of the light thrown by the commentaries and their explanations. The scientific aspect of these questions will be considered later on. Thus, physical nature, when left to herself in the creation of animal and man, is shown to have failed. She can produce the first two and the lower animal kingdoms, but when it comes to the turn of man, spiritual, independent, and intelligent powers are required for his creation. Besides the coats of skin and the breath of animal life, the human monads of preceding rounds, need something higher than purely physical materials to build their personalities with, under the penalty of remaining even below any Frankenstein animal. Footnote. In the first volume of the lately published Introduction à l'étude des races humaines by Monsieur de Quatrefages, there is proof that since the post-tertiary period, and even before that time, since many races were already scattered during that age on the face of the earth, man has not altered one iota in his physical structure. That is something that leans into my theory of evolution. But it is also patently untrue, right? Let's talk about that real quick, because altered not one iota is a big thing. If you were unaware, I'm going to clue you in on something. Back in the days of antiquity, most human beings were around 5'5" or lower. Most. Due to nutritional problems, due to the lifestyle where you're a nomad, most of the skeletal remains from antiquity are from that particular range. But as we have gotten better about having food as a constant source, round about the time we had all them statues popping up holding their navel, I'm gonna let you go check out the Dunking's latest video for that. That is an amazing thing. Round about that time, we started gaining more stature. And so the fact that we have people who, like on average, we now are around 5'10", that is an iota of change. Now, whether that is enough to quantify this, you can make the argument, but not one iota is a big ask, right? There are things which have changed in humanity, in his physical structure. We developed baldness. That is part of what has changed about us. We have a whole lot of things that not a whole lot. There are a few things that have changed. And since a few things have changed, then you can't say not one iota, right? That is mostly correct as far as I am aware, right? There are exceptions to every rule. There were people who were 6 foot tall in isolated regions, but for the most part, most of humanity, that's not a thing. There is a reason why we still today, even though this has been a process which has been building, if somebody is over 6 feet, it is unusual, right? It is not something normal. And so that's just something to bear in mind as we go forward. Yeah. And if surrounded for ages by a fauna that altered from one period or cycle to another, which died out, which was reborn in other forms, so that now there does not exist one single animal on earth, large or small, contemporary with the man of that period. If then every animal has been transformed, save man himself, this fact goes to prove not only his antiquity, but that he is a distinct kingdom. Why should he alone have escaped transformation? It is also important to know, right? We're gonna play the advocate here now. If man has a common source material, which is the current working model, right? Everybody evolved from, what was it, Lucy, the primate that they found in Africa. That's the current working theory. Everybody came from this common source material in Africa, even though that does not work when you play it out. If that were true, everybody had the exact same melanin levels, right? And through migration, we have gone to different areas, and according to the current model, that is what gave us our various distinctions, right? The lesser melanin that I have than some other people have, the variation in facial hair that we have from different peoples around the world, the various things along this nature. Those things also would quantify a iota of change at a minimum, right? Like, even throwing out the scale of most people were 5'5" and now are 5'10". If everybody was the exact same shade, which was probably close to this, now we have variations in shade. That is altering an iota again. And so he did not alone escape transformation. Distinct kingdom, yes, I will grant that. But several different variations within that kingdom. Because, says, and I do not want that in any way, shape, or form to be taken as me endorsing racism, because it is absolutely not. I believe that we are all humans, and our arbitrary distinctions make absolutely no difference except in climatic situations. So, back to the text. Because, says de Quatrefages, the weapon used by him in his struggle with nature and the ever-changing geological conditions and elements was his psychic force, not his physical strength or body, as in the case of animals. Give man only that dose of intelligence and reason with which other mammalia are endowed, and with his present bodily organization, he will show himself the most helpless of creatures of earth. And, as everything goes to prove that the human organism, with all its characteristics, peculiarities, and idiosyncrasies, existed already on our globe in those far distant geological periods when there was not yet one single specimen of the now existing forms of mammalia, what is the unavoidable conclusion? That you're out of your damn mind? There was not yet a single specimen of the now existing forms of mammalia when humans started walking? That is a wild-ass stretch right there. The earliest recorded things that we have are cave paintings, right? Cave paintings depicting mammals. So, to say that humans were pre-existent to mammals, that is a stretch of credulity, right? You are stretching beyond the point of belief, your beliefs. There is, again, zero reason to believe that. There is no, as far as I am aware, right? I could be wrong. I'm fairly well educated on a variety of topics, and humans are one of them. Right? And so, as far as I am aware, there is zero reason to believe that humans pre-existed mammals at all. Right? Concurrent, yes. A later addition, most likely. And that's us, not them. And so, I do not understand this reference at all. Why this? Since all of the human races are of one and the same species, that is true, it follows that this species is the most ancient of all the now living mammalia. That does not follow. That is not logical, right? These things do not necessarily have to be the same. Causation and correlation are not the same, right? And just because you can list these characteristics does not mean that it pre-exists. It doesn't. It just means that there was a different evolutionary tract. Now, again, I don't believe in macroevolution in the current model. That has to be something extraordinary. Can it be that there were aliens that came down and changed the DNA? Yes. Can it be that there was an extrasolar radiation event that caused the spontaneous mutation on the planet? Yes. Can it be simply natural selection? No. Right? Within the species, natural selection plays a part. Absolutely. Variation within the species, absolutely a thing. The change between species, zero evidence for it. Therefore, it is the most stable and persevering of all, and was already as fully developed as it is now, when all the other mammalia, now known, had not even made even their first approach to appearance on this earth. And again, that is simply a wild statement, right? This is being stated as though fact. No, not at all, right? It can live in the realm of speculation, no problem. It cannot live in the realm of fact. You have zero corroborating evidence that this is true, at least as far as I am aware. And I am fairly well versed in most of these things. I'm not an expert on evolution by any means, but I have studied it a good bit. Such is the opinion of the great French naturalist, who gives thereby a terrible blow to Darwinism. Well, Darwinism didn't survive Darwin. Like, Darwin literally debunked his own self. 7. Displeased they were. Our flesh is not there, they said. This is no fit rupa for our brothers of the fifth, no dwellings for the lives. Footnote. The monads of the presentiments of men of the third round, the huge ape-like forms. But shouldn't those men be the more spiritual men, according to what you believe? Like, the more perfect men, according to what you believe? If we came from them and we are lesser than them, then they should have been greater than us. Pure waters, not turbid, they must drink. Let us dry them, the waters. A. Says the Catechism. Commentaries. It is from the material world that descend they, who fashion physical man at the new manvantaras. They are inferior laha, spirits, possessed of a dual body, an astral within an ethereal form. They are the fashioners and creators of our body of illusion. This is not an illusion. Into the forms projected by the laha, pictures, the two letters. Footnote 2. In the esoteric system, the 7 principles in man are represented by 7 letters. The first 2 are more sacred than the 4 letters of the tetragrammaton. The monad, called also the double dragon, descend from the spheres of expectation. Footnote 3. The intermediate spheres, wherein the monads, which have not reached nirvana, are said to slumber in unconscious inactivity between the manvantaras. But they are like a roof with no walls, nor pillars to rest upon. Man needs 4 flames and 3 fires to become one on earth. He requires the essence of 49 fires. Footnote 4. Explained elsewhere, the 3 fires, Pavaka, Pavamana, and Suchi, who had 45 sons, who with their 3 fathers and their father Agni, constitute the 49 fires. Pavamana, fire produced by friction, is the parent of the fire of the Asuras. Suchi, solar fire, is the parent of the fire of the gods, and Pavaka, electric fire, is the father of the fire of the Pitras. See Vayu Purana. But this is an explanation on the material and the terrestrial planes. The flames are evanescent and only periodical. The fires, eternal in their triple unity. They correspond to the 4 lower and the 3 higher human principles. Now, I want to point out that in my belief that all of these fires are exactly the same, right? The designation is a relative one by us. There is, to me, no difference between lightning and the fire that you start with a lighter. They are both activated plasma, activated in slightly different ways. One is through ionic bonds in a very specific way, and another one is through ionic bonds in a different, very specific way. And that is why they present themselves differently, because the source material which they are changing is different. But that doesn't mean that they are different in actuality, right? The electrical charge that is started by piezoelectric quartz in a electric lighter, for instance, creating that spark, is exactly the same as the change in the lightning. And that is the catalyst for the flame in an electric lighter. It is literally starting the chemical change that continues when the flame is burning. It is the spark of the same thing. Now, that is in part friction, right? When you click the little lighter, I got a torch right here, and it is piezoelectric. It has an electric start. Whenever I push this little button, there is friction created in a piezoelectric quartz chip inside of here. If you didn't know, that is what happens. And that click is friction activating the quartz The quartz then produces electric fire, which then, as a consequence, produces regular fire, which can be associated with solar fire. And so all of these are the same thing, just different starting points. Back to the text. That was 4. I must have right here. The 49 fires, to be perfect. It is those who have deserted the superior spheres, the gods of will, footnote 5, the Suras, who become later the Asuras. The gods of will who complete the Manu of illusion, for the double dragon has no hold upon the mere form. It is like the breeze where there is no tree or branch to receive and harbor it. It cannot affect the form where there is no agent of transmission, Manas, mind, and the form knows it not. In the highest worlds, the three are one. Footnote 6. Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. In Devakan, the higher element of the Manas is needed to make it a state of perception and consciousness for the disembodied monad. In the highest worlds, the three are one. On earth, at first, the one becomes two. They are like the two side lines of a triangle that has lost its bottom line, which is the third fire. Catechism, Book 3. Now this requires some explanation before proceeding any further. To do so, especially for the benefit of our Aryan Hindu brethren, whose esoteric interpretations may differ from our own. We shall have to explain to them the foregoing by certain passages in their own exoteric books, namely the Puranas. In the allegories of the latter, Brahma, who is collectively the creative force of the universe, is said to be, at the beginning of the yugas, cycles, possessed of the desire and of the power to create, and impelled by the potencies of what is to be created. Again and again does he, at the outset of a kalpa, put forth a similar creation. See Vishnu Purana Book 1, Chapter 5, and also Manava Dharma Shastra. It is now proposed to examine the exoteric account of the Vishnu Purana and see how much it may agree or disagree with our occult version. Creation of divine beings in the exoteric accounts. In the Vishnu Purana, which is certainly the earliest of all the scriptures of that name, we find, as in all the others, Brahma assuming, as the male god, for purposes of creation, 4 bodies invested by 3 qualities. Footnote. This has, in esotericism, a direct bearing upon the 7 principles of the manifested Brahma, or universe, in the same order as in man. Exoterically, it is only 4 principles. 4 bodies invested by 3 qualities, it is said. In this manner, Maitreya, Jyotsna, dawn, Ratri, night, Ahan, day, and Sandhya, evening twilight, are the 4 bodies of Brahma. As Parasara explains it, when Brahma wants to create the world anew and construct progeny through his will, in the 4-fold condition, or the 4 orders of beings, termed gods, Dayan Kohans, demons, footnote 2. Demons is a very loose word to use, as it applies to a great number of inferior, i.e. more material, spirits, or minor gods, who are so termed because they war with the higher ones, but they are no devils, i.e. more material devas, progenitors, pitras, and men. He collects yoga like Yuyuji, his mind. Strange to say, he begins by creating demons, who thus take precedence over the angels or gods. This is no incongruity, nor is it due to inconsistency, but has, like all the rest, a profound esoteric meaning, quite clear to one free from Christian theological prejudice. He who bears in mind that the principle Mahat, or intellect, the universal mind, literally the great, which esoteric philosophy explains as the manifested omniscience, the first product of pradhana, primordial matter, as Vishnu Purana says. But the first cosmic aspect of Parabrahm, or the esoteric Sat, the universal soul. Footnote 4.3. The same order of principles in man: Atma, spirit; Buddhi, soul; its vehicle, as matter, is the Vahan of spirit, and Manas, mind. The third, or the fifth, microcosmically, on the plane of personality, Manas is the first. Wait, where am I? I'm down here. As occultism teaches, is that the root of self-consciousness will understand the reason. Let's go back. Hold on. Right here. But the first cosmic aspect of Parabrahm, or the esoteric Sat, the universal soul, as occultism teaches, is that the root of self-consciousness will understand the reason why. The so-called demons, who are esoterically the self-asserting and intellectually active principle, are the positive poles of creation, so to say, hence the first produced. This is, in brief, the process as narrated allegorically in the Puranas. Having concentrated his mind into itself and the quality of darkness pervading Brahma's assumed body, the asuras issuing from his thigh were first produced, after which, abandoning this body, was transformed into night. Two important points are involved herein. A. Primarily in the Rig Veda, the asuras are shown as spiritual divine beings. Their etymology is derived from asu, breath, the breath of God, and they mean the same as the Supreme Spirit or the Zoroastrian Ahura. It is later on, for purposes of theology and dogma, that they are shown issuing from Brahma's thigh, and that their name began to be derived from a privative and sura, god, solar deities, or not a god, and that they became the enemies of the gods. Every ancient theogony, without exception, from the Aryan to the Egyptian down to that of Hesiod, places, in the order of cosmogonical evolution, night before the day. Even Genesis, where darkness is upon the face of the deep before the first day. The reason for that is that prior to the spoken word, or logos, the spirit was inactive. Right? We talk about my Trinity all of the time. I believe in the body, the temple of God by which you navigate 5D space. I believe in the soul, which is the individualized piece of divinity, which is you, making the decisions for the vessel. And I believe in the spirit. Now, the spirit is, quite literally, every single existing atom in existence, all at one time. It is like a great biofilm. There is no separation from it. But until the point where that biofilm becomes active, it is dark. Light is motion. Light is matter in motion. Light is heat being transferred. Light is motion. And without motion, there is no light. So, before there can be existence and things in motion, there is no light. But once there is things in motion, there is no exception from light. Like even darkness, you can isolate yourself inside of a room, completely dark. You are emitting light. That is a real thing. Your eyes emit light. It can be traced, tracked, and proven. This is a thing. Because you are alive, that light exists. Because there is change within your body, that light exists. Without light, there is no change. The Holy Spirit is existent, but the motion of that spirit is the logos, the fohat, right? The active elements. So before it is active, it cannot be other than dark. It's not even possible. But if there is movement, there cannot be complete absence of dark. Like even if you were to isolate the room, there would still be tiny, minuscule transformations happening simply from cohesion, right? The various elements bonding into molecules, whether that's condensation or some other form, there will be some transfer of energy. And any time that there is a transfer of energy, there is a small little transfer of light. That is simply how the mechanics of it has to work. So even if it is as simple as there is climate control in a completely isolated room, by removing the heat or by adding heat, you are enacting change, and change by definition is going to create at least a small, minuscule measurement of light. Every single ionic bond has a spark. Back to the text. The reason for this is that every cosmogony, except in the secret doctrine, begins by the secondary creation, so-called, to wit, the manifested universe, the genesis of which has to open by a marked differentiation between the eternal light of primary creation, whose mystery must remain forever darkness, to the finite conception and intellect of the profane, and the secondary evolution of manifested visible nature. The Veda contains the whole philosophy of that division without having ever been correctly explained by Orientalists, because it has never been understood by them. Continuing to create, Brahma assumes another form, that of the day, and creates from his breath the gods, who are endowed with the quality of goodness, passivity. Footnote. Thus, says the commentary, the saying, by day the gods are most powerful, and by night the demons, is purely allegorical. In his next body, the quality of the great passivity prevailed, which is also negative goodness, and from the side of that personage issued the Pitras, the progenitors of men, because, as the text explains, Brahma thought of himself, during the process, as the father of the world. Footnote 2. This thinking of oneself as this, that, or the other, is the chief factor in the production of every kind of psychic or even physical phenomenon. The words, whosoever shall say to this mountain, be thou removed and cast into the sea, and shall not doubt, that thing will come to pass, are no vain words. Only the word faith ought to be translated by will. Faith without will is like a windmill without wind, barren of results. This is Kriya Sakti, the mysterious yoga power explained elsewhere. This body of Brahma, when cast off, becomes the Sandhya, evening twilight, the interval between day and night. Finally, Brahma assumed his last form, pervaded by the quality of foulness, and from this men, in whom foulness and passion predominate, were produced. This body, when cast off, becomes the dawn or morning twilight, the twilight of humanity. Here, Brahma stands esoterically for the Pitras. He is collectively the Pitar, father. The true esoteric meaning of this allegory must now be explained. Brahma here symbolizes personally the collective creators of the world and men, the universe with all its numberless productions of things movable and seemingly immovable. Footnote. The same idea is found in the first 4 chapters of Genesis with their Lord and God, which are the Elohim and the androgynous Eloha. He is, collectively, the Prajapati, the Lords of Being, and the 4 bodies typify the 4 classes of creative powers, or Dayan Kohans, described in the commentary directly following stanza 7 in Book 1. The whole philosophy of the so-called creation, of the good and evil in this world, and of the whole cycle of manvanteric results therefrom, hangs on the correct comprehension of these 4 bodies of Brahma. The reader will now be prepared to understand the real, the esoteric, significance of what follows. Moreover, there is an important point to be cleared up. Christian theology, having arbitrarily settled and agreed that Satan, with his fallen angels, belonged to the earliest creation, Satan being the first created, the wisest and most beautiful of God's archangels, the word was given, the keynote struck. Henceforth, all the pagan scriptures were made to yield the same meaning, and all were shown to be demonical. And it was and is claimed that truth and fact belong to, and commence only with, Christianity. Even the Orientalists and mythologists, some of them no Christians at all, but infidels or men of science, entered unconsciously to themselves, and by the mere force of association of ideas and habit, into the theological groove. Purely Brahmanical considerations based on greed of power and ambition allowed the masses to remain in ignorance of great truths, and the same causes led the initiates among the early Christians to remain silent, while those who had never known the truth disfigured the order of things, judging of the hierarchy of angels by their exoteric form. Thus, as the Asuras had become the rebellious inferior gods, fighting the higher ones in popular creeds, so the highest archangel, in truth the Agatheo demon, the eldest benevolent Logos, became, with theology, the adversary, or Satan. But is this warranted by the correct interpretation of any old scripture? The answer is most certainly not. As the Mazdean scriptures of the Zendavesta, the Vendidad, and the others correct and expose the later cunning shuffling of the gods in the Hindu pantheon, and restore, through Ahura, the Asuras, to their legitimate place in theogony. So the recent discoveries of the Chaldean tablets vindicate the good name of the first divine emanations. This is easily proved. Christian angelology is directly and solely derived from that of the Pharisees, who brought their tenets from Babylonia. The Sadducees, the real guardians of the laws of Moses, knew not of and rejected any angels, opposing even the immortality of the human soul, not impersonal spirit. In the Bible, the only angels spoken of are the sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6, who are now regarded as the Nephilim, the fallen angels, and several angels in human form, the messengers of the Jewish God, whose own rank needs a closer analysis than heretofore given. Vidi supra stanza 1, where it shows that the early Akkadians called Yah wisdom, that which was later disfigured by the Chaldees and Semites into Tismat, Tisalat, and the Tahalata of Berosus, the female sea dragon, now Satan. Truly, how art thou fallen by the hand of man, O bright star and son of the morning? Now, what do the Babylonian accounts of creation, as found in the Assyrian fragments of tiles, tell us? Those very accounts upon which the Pharisees built their archangelology. But compare Mr. G. Smith's Assyrian Discoveries, page 398, and his Chaldean Account of Genesis, page 107. The tablet with the story of the 7 wicked gods or spirits has the following account. We print the important passages in italics. 1. In the first days, the evil gods. 2. The angels who were in rebellion, who in the lower part of heaven, 3. Had been created. 4. They caused their evil work. 5. Devising with wicked heads. Thus, we are shown as plainly as can be on a fragment which remained unbroken, so that there can be no dubious reading, that the rebellious angels had been created in the lower part of heaven. In example, that they belonged, and do belong, to a material plane of evolution, although, as it is not the plane of which we are made cognizant through our senses, it remains generally invisible to us. and is thus regarded as subjective. That would be the seventh plane of existence. Were the Gnostics so wrong after this, in affirming that this, our visible world, and especially the earth, had been created by lower angels, the inferior Elohim, of which, as they taught, the God of Israel was one? These Gnostics were nearer in time to the records of the archaic secret doctrine, and therefore ought to be allowed to have known better than non-initiated Christians, who took upon themselves, hundreds of years later, to remodel and correct what was said. But let us see what the same tablet says further on. 7. There were 7 of them, the wicked gods. Then follows the description of these, the fourth being a serpent, the phallic symbol of the fourth race in human evolution. 15. The 7 of them, messengers of the god Anu, their king. Now, Anu belongs to the Chaldean Trinity and is identical with Sin, the moon, in one aspect. And the moon in the Hebrew Kabbalah is the arga of the seed of all material life, and is still more closely connected, Kabbalistically, with Jehovah, who is double-sexed as Anu is. They are both represented in esotericism and viewed from a dual aspect, male or spiritual, female or material, or spirit and matter, the two antagonistic principles. Hence, the messengers of Anu, who is Sin, the moon, are shown in verses 28 to 41 as being finally overpowered by the same Sin with the help of Bel, the sun, and Ishtar, Venus. This is regarded as a contradiction by the Assyriologists, but is simply metaphysics in the esoteric teaching. There is more than one interpretation, for there are 7 keys to the mystery of the fall. Moreover, there are 2 falls in theology, the rebellion of the archangels and their fall, and the fall of Adam and Eve. Thus, the lower as well as the higher hierarchies are charged with a supposed crime. The word supposed is the true and correct term, for in both cases it is founded on misconception. Both are considered in occultism as karmic effects, and both belong to the laws of evolution. Intellectual and spiritual on the one hand, physical and psychic on the other. The fall is a universal allegory. It sets forth at one end of the ladder of evolution the rebellion, an example, the act of differentiating intellection or consciousness on its various planes, seeking union with matter. And at the other, the lower end, the rebellion of matter against spirit, or of action against spiritual inertia. And here lies the germ of an error which has had such disastrous effects on the intelligence of civilized societies for over 1,800 years. In the original allegory, it is matter, hence the more material angels, which was regarded as the conqueror of spirit, or the archangels who fell on this plane. They of the flaming sword, or animal passions, had to put flight to the spirits of darkness. Yet it is the latter who fought for the supremacy of the conscious and divine spirituality on earth and failed, succumbing to the power of matter. But in theological dogma, we see the reverse. It is Michael who is like unto God, the representative of Jehovah, who is the leader of the celestial hosts, as Lucifer, in Milton's fancy, is one of the infernal host, who has the best of Satan. It is true that the nature of Michael depends upon that of his creator and master. Who the latter is, one may find out by carefully studying the allegory of the wall in heaven with the astronomical key, as shown by Bentley, the war of the Titans against the gods in Hesiod, and also the war of the Asuros, or the Tarakamaya, against the devils in Puranic legend, are identical in all save the names. The aspects of the stars show Bentley taking the year 945 BC as the nearest date for such conjunction, that All the planets, except Saturn, were on the same side of the heavens as the sun and moon, and hence were his opponents. And yet it is Saturn, or the Jewish moon god, who is shown as prevailing, both by Hesiod and Moses, neither of whom was understood. This is another one of those things, right? There are three models of the universe, right? One is geocentric. The Earth is the center of the universe, or the solar system. That is most likely patently untrue. There is the Copernican model, which places the sun in the center of the solar system and everything revolves around the sun. That is closer to truth. And there is the Tychos model, which is Tychos, which has as the center of the solar system, instead of the sun, Saturn. There are many reasons why this is a possibility, not the least of which is mathematics, because instead of having to explain away some of the movements of the heavens because of the Copernican model, it can, however, be part of the Tychos model, right? The retrogressions and the recessions of the planets in the heavens are better explained by the Tychos model than it is by the Copernican model. And if the Tychos model is correct, and several other key ruminations, then this makes sense, because there is a theory that at one point in time, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and maybe even Jupiter were aligned in such a way that they formed one solid fixture in the sky, right? That's not to say that there wasn't a day-night cycle or anything of that nature. Well, I'm not positive exactly how those mechanics work, but these things were in a geosynchronous locked orbit in correlation with the sun in this particular model. Now, the Thunderbolts project is going to be a better reference for that particular part of it. You can look up the Tychos model and see how the planets probably revolve in a better explained manner. And on my page, if you click on my profile and you go to my page, there are recommended channels. One of those is the Thunderbolts project. They have done extensive work on this one cohesive unit in the sky and why they believe that, and it is very good. And so I recommend it all of the time, because once again, they are more technical than I am. These are actual astrophysicists who are fairly comprehensively explaining some of the things by which the current model has to make up numbers to account for. Thus, it was that the real meaning became distorted. Stanza 2 continued. 8. The flames came, the fires with the sparks, the night fires and the day fires. A. They dried out the turbid dark waters with their heat, they quenched them. The Lahas, spirits, of the high, the Lamayin, those of below, came. B. They slew the forms which were 2 and 4-faced, they fought the goat-men, and the dog-headed men, and the men with fishes' bodies. A. The flames are a hierarchy of spirits parallel to, if not identical with, the burning, fiery seraphim, mentioned by Isaiah, those who attend, according to Hebrew theogony, the throne of the Almighty. Mela is the Lord of the Flames. When he appears on the earth, he assumes the personality of a Buddha, says a popular legend. He is one of the most ancient and revered Lahas, a Buddhist Saint Michael. B. The word below must not be taken to mean infernal regions, but simply a spiritual, or rather ethereal, being of a lower grade, because nearer to the earth or one step higher than our terrestrial sphere, while the Lahas are spirits of the highest spheres, whence the name of the capital of Tibet, lahasasa. Besides a statement of purely physical nature and belonging to the evolution of life on Earth, there may be another allegorical meaning attached to this sloka, or indeed, as is taught, several. The flames or fires represent spirit, or the male element, and water, matter, or the opposite element. And here, again, we find in the action of the spirit slaying the purely material form a reference to the eternal struggle on the physical and psychic planes between spirit and matter, besides a scientific cosmic fact. For, as said in the next verse, 9. Mother Water, the great sea wept. She arose, she disappeared in the moon, which had lifted her, which had given her birth. A. Now what can this mean? It is not an evident reference to tidal action in the early stage of history. Is it not an evident reference to tidal action in the early stage of our history of our planet in its fourth round? Modern research has been busy of late in its speculations on the Paleozoic high tides. Mr. Darwin's theory was that not less than 52 million years ago, and probably much more, the moon originated from the Earth's plastic mass. Starting from the point where research was left by Helmholtz, Farrell, Sir William Thomson, and others, he retraced the course of tidal retardation of the Earth's rotary motions far back into the very night of time, and placed the moon, during the infancy of our planet, at only a fraction of its present distance. In short, his theory was that it is the moon which separated from the Earth, the tidal elevation concurring with the swing of the globular mass, centrifugal tendency being then nearly equal to gravity. The latter was overcome, and the tidally elevated mass could thus separate completely from the Earth. Footnote. It is important to note that there is a story of this happening. Right? When we dealt with the very first, the Enuma Elish, it is possible that this is an interpretation that can be pulled from the Enuma Elish. That at one point in history, there was a larger planet called Tiamat, and that it was populated with peoples, and that it was struck by a extra solar influence. And by extra solar, I mean outside of our solar system's direct influence. Something that we don't see all of the time. Now, that has been attributed to Nibiru, or Planet X, however you would prefer to account for that. That is not something that is provable, but it is something that is definitely recorded, that once upon a time, humans witnessed this thing. Now, whether that's true or not, who knows, right? It is possible, right? It is entirely possible that the Earth once contained the mass of the moon, and that we did not have a moon. And that there was something that came and hit the Earth and knocked a chunk of it off. Humanity could survive something like that. It would be exceedingly difficult. The planet would repair itself, right? If a giant chunk was knocked out of it, we would devolve into a sphere again, in the same way that the moon would devolve into a sphere from whatever chunk-like structure it was out in space. Our visits to the moon confirm this to a large degree, that the composition of the moon is remarkably similar to the composition of our planet. That does not necessarily mean that it came from our planet, but it does not deny the possibility. There are many different hypotheses attached to this. Some people believe that the moon is hollow for reasons, right? It rang at one point in time in a way that was, you were able to hear it on Earth. That's wild, but it is something. The same thing is true for other planets as well, so it does not remove it from the realm of possibility. Maybe it just formed hollow when it was knocked loose. All of these things are possible, but not necessarily true. But if the Earth were populated at the time that this happened, people would definitely make accounts of that. They would definitely record that by whatever means they had possible at their fingertips, right? If it happened, it would have been a globally cataclysmic event. Most people would die, and that again falls right into what I believe is a thing, right? So, now let's see what this footnote was. But see the difficulties suggested later in the works of various geologists against this theory. Compare R.S. Bull's article in Nature, and also what the American geologists say. Now, she believes that the Earth came from the moon. If that were true, that would be a lot harder, right? We would have to have been knocked free from the moon in a larger piece than the moon was knocked free from the Earth. That's a bit harder to swallow, right? That doesn't mean that it's not possible. It just means that it is a lot harder to conceptualize being actuality. Now, if that particular Tiamat thing was true, it would explain the asteroid belt, right? If there was a larger planet which was in our position slightly farther out and we got struck, it would knock us in a little bit, sure. We would lose some mass. And besides the moon being knocked loose, the asteroids would then be explained by it. Back to the text. The occult teaching is the reverse of this. The moon is far older than the Earth, and, as explained in Book 1, it is the latter which owes its being to the former. However, astronomy and geology may explain the fact. Now, again, this is going to be a hard sell for me for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being the mass, right? Being the lack of water, right? There are many reasons to believe that, like, if you are going to believe one of these two, right? Either a chunk was knocked loose from the Earth and formed the moon, or a chunk was knocked loose from the moon and formed the Earth, the easier of the two to believe is that the chunk was knocked from the Earth. We can even account for the missing mass, right? The Gulf of Mexico, pretty closely, the pit in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, which is not a normally geologically explainable occurrence, right? The Gulf of Mexico is an anomaly in many, many ways, but the hollowed out part inside of the Gulf of Mexico concurs fairly well with the mass of the moon. And so, while I cannot say definitively that this is not true, it is most likely not true. It is more likely that the Earth was first and the moon came later than it is that the moon was first and the Earth came later, despite however long it has been recorded otherwise. Hence, the tides and the attractions towards the moon, as shown by the liquid portion of the globe, ever striving to raise itself towards its parent. Though, this is the meaning of the sentence that the mother water arose and disappeared in the moon, which had lifted her, which had given her birth. Okay, now, devil's advocate. If the Earth was stricken and a piece removed, and that led to the formation of the moon. There are legends, however they may be attributed, that once upon a time there was no real free-flowing water on the planet. There was something that is speculated as being called the vapor barrier, which would have been a more condensed, thicker atmosphere than we currently have. Imagine walking outside and it is 99% humidity all of the time. 100% humidity is rain, but 99% is pretty miserable. Take it from me, I'm in Louisiana. We deal with 90 plus humidity all the time. And so, in that theory, once upon a time, there was no water free flowing on the Earth. It was contained in a vapor barrier, and people got their their nutrition and their hydration from eating plants, mainly. That is the understanding. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But if it were true that at this point in time, say it was called Tiamat, and there was this vapor canopy which sustained us, and there was no free-flowing water. When this extrasolar event happened and the Earth was stricken by this cataclysmic event and the moon was sheared off, the correction on the planet for that mass, where it reformed into a semi-perfect ovoid sphere, would by necessity mean that there is less mass on the Earth, and that probably plays a great deal into why there is no longer a vapor canopy, right? The mass of the Earth being smaller, and it would account for the condensation of that entire vapor canopy. And, well, now you need somewhere to put all of that water. And so we got oceans and we got rivers. The water cycle, in the way that we understand it, was made. If all of that is true, and that is all speculation, but if all of that was true, then it would make sense that at that point, the moon would affect the liquid, right? Like, up until that point, it didn't, because there was no moon, for one. But because there was no moon, there was no tides, and there was no oceans, no seas. Now, this is wild speculation, right? This is things, again, that is not going to be provable, but we can speculate upon them as long as we maintain that they are speculation. If all of that is true, then it explains this with no metaphysical reason needed. Right? It explains through science, maybe not the best grasp of science, but at least along the ways that somebody else could pick it up and probably prove it, that this explanation fits. That if these things happened, it explains why this. Right? That doesn't make any of it true, but this is being stated as truth, and there is an alternative that does make better sense. When they, the Rupas, were destroyed, Mother Earth remained bare. She asked to be dried. Footnote 1 and 2. Footnote 1. The goddess who gave birth to these primordial monsters in the account of Berosus was Thalath, in Greek, Thalassa, the sea. 2. See for comparison the account of creation by Berosus, Alexander Polyhistor, and the hideous beings born from the twofold principle, earth and water, in the abyss of primordial creation. Nereus, centaurs, men with the limbs of horses and human bodies, and Chemnadas, men with the head of horses, created by Brahma in the commencement of the Kalpa. And again, that could be explained by the extrasolar electromagnetic genetic mutations to me. A. The time for its incrustation had arrived. The waters had separated, and the process was started. It was the beginning of a new life. This is what one key divulges to us. Another key teaches the origin of water, its admixture with fire, liquid fire it calls it. 3. Footnote 3. See commentary following Sloka 18. Its admixture with fire, and enters upon an alchemical description of the progeny of the two. Solid matter, such as minerals and earths. From the watts of space, the progeny of the male spirit fire and the female gaseous water has become the oceanic expanse on Earth. Varuna is dragged down from infinite space to reign as Neptune over the finite seas. As always, the popular fancy is found to be based on a strictly scientific foundation. Water is the symbol of the female element everywhere, mater, from which the letter M is derived pictorially from diagram, a water hieroglyph. It is the universal matrix or the great deep. Venus, the great mother virgin, issues forth from the sea wave, and Cupid, or Eros, is her son. But Venus is the later mythological variant of Gaia, or Gaia, the earth, which, in its higher aspect, is nature, Prakriti, and metaphysically Aditi, and even Mula Prakriti, the root of Prakriti, or its noumenon. Hence, Cupid, or love in his primitive essence, is Eros, the divine will, or desire of manifesting itself through visible creation. Thence, Fohat, the prototype of Eros, becomes on earth the great power, life, electricity, or the spirit of life-giving. Let us remember the Greek theogony and enter into the spirit of its philosophy. We are taught by the Greeks, see the Iliad 4. I am reading the Iliad, if you were unaware, that all things, gods included, owe their being to the ocean and his wife Tethys, the latter being Gaia, the earth or nature. But who is ocean? Ocean is the immeasurable space, spirit in chaos, which is the deity, see Book 1, and Tethys is not the earth, but primordial matter in the process of formation. In our case, it is no longer Aditi Gaia who begets Oranos, or Varuna, the chief Aditya among the 7 planetary gods, but Prakriti, materialized and localized. The moon, masculine in its theogonic character, is, in its cosmic aspect only, the female generative principle, as the sun is the male emblem thereof. Water is the progeny of the moon, an androgyne deity with every nation. Evolution proceeds on the laws of analogy in cosmos, as in the formation of the smallest globe. Thus, the above, applying to the modus operandi at the time when the universe was appearing, applies also in the case of our Earth's formation. This stanza opens by speaking of 30 crores, 30 million of years. We may be asked, what could the ancients know of the duration of geological periods when no modern scientist or mathematician is able to calculate their duration with anything like approximate accuracy? Whether they had or had not better means, and it is maintained that they had them in their zodiacs, still the chronology of the ancient Brahmins shall now be given as faithfully as possible. There we go. Let's go ahead and see. The chronology of the Brahmins. No greater riddle exists in science. No problem is more helplessly insoluble than the question, how old, even approximately, are the sun and the moon, the earth and man? What does modern science know of the duration of the ages of the world, or even the length of geological periods? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That is no longer the case. We do know at least something. If one turns to science for chronological information, one is told by those who are straightforward and truthful, as for instance Mr. Pengelly, the eminent geologist, we do not know. Footnote. For a similar admission, see Professor Lefebvre's Philosophy. One will learn that, so far, no trustworthy numerical estimate of the ages of the world and man could be made, and that both geology and anthropology are at sea. Yet, when a student of esoteric philosophy presumes to bring forward the teachings of occult science, he is at once sat upon. Why should this be so, since, when reduced to their own physical methods, the greatest scientists have failed to arrive at even an approximate agreement? It is important to note that we still do not know the age of the Earth. We still do not know the age of the moon, but we do know the cycles, right? We have the ability to track and trace through ice cores, through drilling cores, through fossil remains, through various things, right? Not even giving credence to carbon dating, right? But Simply through the accumulation of snow through averages, we can get a rough approximation of how long a particular ice age lasted. We know the difference between the younger Dryas and the older Dryas. We know the difference between the tertiary periods and the current periods. Like we know how to divide them. Now, how accurate that is a matter of debate, right? We know that there was a Paleozoic era, but exactly how long the Paleozoic era lasted is a matter of some debate, but not great debate. There is variation of even 1,000,000 years, but it is, for the most part, agreed upon that this duration of time was the Paleolithic era and the Paleozoic era and the various ones throughout, right? We do have that agreement now. We do have that understanding. Whether it is completely accurate is up for debate, but it is a fairly good approximation of these time periods. Again, I refer you to the 12,000 year disaster cycle for some elucidation upon this subject. We do have at least some understanding that she is directly wrong about. It is true that science can hardly be blamed for it. Indeed, in the Cimmerian darkness of the prehistoric ages, the explorers are lost in a labyrinth whose great corridors are doorless, allowing no visible exit into the archaic past. Lost in the maze of their own conflicting speculations, rejecting, as they have always done, the evidence of Eastern tradition without any clue or one single certain milestone to guide them. What can geologists or anthropologists do but pick up the slender thread of Ariadne where they first perceive it and then proceed at perfect random? Therefore, we are told that the furthest date to which the documentary record extends is now generally regarded by anthropology as but the earliest distinctly visible point of prehistoric period, Encyclopedia Britannica. At the same time, it is confessed that beyond that period stretches back a vast, indefinite series of prehistoric ages, and again, it is not necessarily indefinite anymore. It is with those specified ages that we shall begin. They are prehistoric to the naked eye of matter only. To the spiritual eye of the seer and the prophet of every race, Ariadne's thread stretches beyond that historic period without break or flaw, surely and steadily into the very night of time, and the hand which holds it is too mighty to drop it or even let it break. Records exist, although they may be rejected as fanciful by the profane, though many of them are tacitly accepted by philosophers and men of great learning, and meet with an unvarying refusal only from the official and collective body of orthodox science. Now that part's got some truth to it. And since the latter refuses to give us even an approximate idea of the duration of the geological ages, save in a few conflicting and contradictory hypotheses, let us see what Aryan philosophy can teach us. Such computations as are given in the Manu and the Puranas, save trifling and most evidently intentional exaggerations, are, as already stated, almost identical with those taught in esoteric philosophy. This may be seen by comparing the two in the Hindu calendar of recognized orthodoxy. The best and most complete of all such calendars, at present, as vouched for by the learned Brahmins of South India, is the already mentioned Tamil calendar, called the Tirukakanda Panchanga, compiled, as we are told, from and in full accordance with secret fragments of Asura-Maya's data. As Asura-Maya is said to have been the greatest astronomer, so he is whispered to have also been the most powerful sorcerer of the White Island, which had become black with sin, in example, the islands of Atlantis. The White Island is a symbolical name. Asoramaya is said to have lived, see the tradition of Jahanabhaskara, in Romakapura in the west, because the name is an allusion to the land and cradle of the Sweatborn of the third race. That land or continent had disappeared ages before Asoramaya lived, since he was an Atlantean, but he was a direct descendant of the wise race, the race that never dies. Many are the legends concerning this hero, the pupil of Surya, the sun god himself, as the Indian accounts allege. It matters little whether he lived on one or another island, but the question is to prove that he was no myth, as Dr. Weber and others would make him. The fact of Romakapura in the west being named as the birthplace of this hero of the archaic ages is the more interesting because it is so very suggestive of the esoteric teaching about the sweat-born races, the men born from the pores of their parents. Romakupas, meaning hair pores in Sanskrit. In Mahabharata 11:12, 10,308, a people named Ramayas are said to have been created from the pores of Virabhadra, the terrible giant who destroyed Daksha's sacrifice. Other tribes and people are also represented as born in this way. All these references to the later second and earlier third root races. The following figures are from the calendar just referred to. A footnote remarks the points of disagreement with the figures of the Arya Samaj school. From the beginning of cosmic evolution up to the Hindu year Tirana, or 1887, 1,955,884,687 years. There is a footnote. The esoteric doctrine says that this cosmic evolution refers only to our solar system, while exoteric Hinduism makes the figures refer, if we do not mistake, to the whole universal system. 2. The astral, mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms up to man have taken to evolve 300 million years. Footnote 2. Another point of disagreement. Occultism says, the astral prototypes of the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms up to man have taken that time, 300 million years, to evolve, reforming out of the cast-off materials of the preceding round, which, though very dense and physical in their own cycle, are relatively ethereal as compared with the materiality of our present middle round. At the expiration of these 300 million years, nature, on the way to the physical and material, down the arc from descent, begins with mankind and works downward, hardening or materializing forms as it proceeds. Thus, the fossils found in strata, to which in antiquity, not of 18, but of many hundreds of millions of years, must be ascribed, belonging in reality to forms of the preceding round, which, while living, were far more ethereal than physical. As we know the physical, dinosaurs were ethereal. Did you know that? That we perceive and disinter them as tangible forms is due to the process of materialization or crystallization referred to, which took place subsequently at the beginning of the fourth round and reached its maximum after the appearance of man, proceeding parallel with his physical evolution. This alone illustrates the fact that the degree of materiality of the earth changes pari passu with that of its inhabitants, and thus man now finds as tangible fossils what were once the, to his present senses, ethereal forms of the lower kingdoms. The above Brahmanical figures refer to evolution beginning on globe A in the first round. In this volume we speak only of this, the fourth round. 3. Time. From the first appearance of humanity on planetary chain, 1,664,500,987 years. Footnote 3. The difference and the change of ciphers in the last three triplets of figures the writer cannot undertake to account for, because they are pulled out of an ass. According to every calculation, once the 300 millions are subtracted, the figures ought to stand 1,655,000,884,687, but they are given as stated in the Tamil calendar above named and as they were translated. The school of the late Pandit Dayanand Saraswati, founder of the Arya Samaj, gives the date of 1,960,852,987. See the Arya magazine of Lahore, the cover of which bears the words Aryan Era, 1,960,852,987. Now, I don't know about these numbers. All right, 4. The number that elapsed in the Vayavasvata Manvantara. Footnote. Vayavasvata Manu is the one human being. Some versions add to him the 7 rishis, who, in the Matya Avatar allegory, is saved from the deluge in a boat, like Noah in the ark. Therefore, this Vayavasvata Manvantara would be the post-Diluvian period. This, however, does not refer to the later Atlantean or Noah's deluge, nor to the cosmic deluge or pralaya of obscuration, which preceded our round, but to the appearance of mankind in the latter round. There is a great difference made, however, between the Nayamatika, occasional or incidental, Prakaritia, elemental, Atayanatika, the absolute, and Nitya, the perpetual pralaya, the latter being described as Brahma's contingent recoalescence of the universe at the end of Brahma's day. The question was raised by a learned Brahmin theosophist, whether there is such a thing as cosmic pralaya, because otherwise the Logos, Krishna, would have to be reborn, and he is Aja, unborn. We cannot see why. The Logos is said to be born only metaphorically, as the sun is born daily, or, rather, a beam of that sun is born in the morning and is said to die when it disappears, whereas it is simply reabsorbed into the parent essence. Cosmic pralaya is for things visible, not for the arupa, formless world. The cosmic or universal pralaya comes only at the end of 100 years of Brahma, when the universal dissolution is said to take place. Then the avyaya, say the exoteric scriptures, the eternal life symbolized by Vishnu, assuming the character of Rudra, the destroyer, enters into the 7 rays of the sun and drinks up all of the waters of the universe. Thus fed, the 7 solar rays dilate to 7 suns and set fire to the whole cosmos. All right. The number that elapsed since the Vayavasvata Manvantara, or the human period, up to the year 1887 is just 18,618,728 years. The full period of one Manvantara is 308,448,000 years. 6. 14 Manvantaras plus the period of one Satya Yuga make 1 day of Brahma, or complete Manvantara, and make 4,320,000,000 years. Therefore, a Mahayuga consists of 4,320,000 years. Footnote 2. Since a Mahayuga is the 1,000th part of a day of Brahma. At least that actually has an explanation. The year 1887 is from the commencement of Kali Yuga, 4,989 years. To make this still clearer in its details, the following computations by Rao Bahadur P. Srinivas Rao are given from the Theosophist of November 1885. Mortal years. 360 days of mortals make a year. That is untrue. 1. Krita Yuga Krita Yuga contains 1,728,000. Treta Yuga contains 1,296,000. Dwapara Yuga contains 864,000. Kali Yuga contains 432,000. The total of the said 4 yugas constitute a Mahayuga, 4,320,000. 71 of such Mahayugas form the period of the reign of one Manu, 306,720,000. The reign of 14 Manus embraces the duration of 994 yugas, which is equal to 4,294,080,000. Now, so far, there is no reason for any of these numbers to make any sense. They really aren't. I was really hoping that this would have some explanation, but it doesn't. Right? Because, look at this. Why are these divisions in this particular way? Now, right off the top, this is not correct, right? We know beyond the shadow of a doubt that it is 364 and a quarter days, right? That is something that we know. So it is not 360 days make a year, straight off the top. But then the Krita Yuga contains 1,728,000, but the Treta Yuga only contains 1,296,000. Why? Why is one different than the other? What makes that different? Right? That's what I'm looking to have explained. And so far, there has been no explanation of that. Right? Now, complicated mathematics can be done for whatever, but it does not mean that it is necessarily true. This, to me, so far, is exactly as reliable as gematria, which is to say, not at fucking all. Back to the text. Add Sandhis, in example, intervals between the reign of each Manu, which amount to 6 Mahayugas, equal to 25,920,000 years. The total of these reigns and interregnums of 14 Manus is 1,000 Mahayugas, which constitute a kalpa. In example, 1 day of Brahma. 4,320,000 days. As Brahma's night is of equal duration, 1 day and night of Brahma would contain 8,640,000,000 years. 360 of such days and nights make 1 year of Brahma is 3,110,400,000 years. 100 such years constitutes the whole period of Brahma's age. In example, Mahakalpa. 311 gazillion, right, that's next, 40 trillion years. These are the exoteric figures accepted throughout India, and they dovetail pretty neatly with those of the secret works. How? We have still no explanation of how. I assumed from something that we had read in another one that it was based upon the grand precession of the equinoxes, but your base calculation is incorrect. It doesn't make sense. The latter, moreover, amplify them by a division into a number of esoteric cycles never mentioned in Brahmanical popular writings, one of which, the divisions of the yugas into racial cycles, is given elsewhere as an instance. The rest, in their details, have of course never been made public. They are, nevertheless, known to every twice-born, Dvija, or initiated, Brahmin, and the Puranas contain references to some of them in veiled terms, which no matter of fact Orientalist has yet endeavored to make out, nor could he if he would. These sacred astronomical cycles are of immense antiquity, and most of them pertain, as stated, to the calculations of Narada and Asura Maya. The latter has the reputation as a giant and a sorcerer. But the antediluvian giants, the Gibborim of the Bible, were not all bad or sorcerers, as Christian theology, which sees in every occultist a servant of the evil one, would have it. Nor were they worse than many of the faithful sons of the church. A Torquemada and a Catherine de Medicis certainly did more harm in their day and in the name of their master than any Atlantean giant or demigod of antiquity ever did. Whether his name was Cyclops or Medusa, or yet the Orphic Titan, the anguipedal monster known as Ephialites. There were good giants in days of old just as there were bad pygmies now. And the Rakshasas, the Yakshas of Lanka, are no worse than our modern dynamiters and certain Christian and civilized generals during modern wars. Nor are they myths. He who would laugh at Briareus and Orion ought to abstain from going to, or even talking of, Karnak or Stonehenge, remarked somewhere a modern writer. Now, I am going to state this. If it is true that this guy, Narada or Asura Maya, was indeed Atlantean, and indeed wrote down these things, then there is a foundational basis. Now, the hard part is going to be proving that, right? I am not familiar with this source material. I will try to find it at some point, but I've got quite a bit to go through, so I may forget. Remind me down below if you know the source material to list it, because I would like to see this, right? I would like to see the primary of the legend of Narada and Asura Maya. I don't know that that was even listed in here unless it's in the Puranas, and we will be getting to those, but I'm not sure when, right? We still have a long way to go before we get to the Rig Veda. If he was indeed Atlantean and he did indeed record these things, then that would account for things in a factual manner. If that is not true, then this is all speculation. As the Brahmanical figures given above are approximately the basic calculations of our esoteric system, the reader is requested to carefully keep them in mind. I am not, right? I am not going to attribute any special value to any of those numbers because I do not have any reason to do so. Unless it can be shown to me that this is a primary source material from an Atlantean who had more knowledge, that's going to be hard, right? Nobody, like we have zero records from 1 trillion years ago. There's the geological record, but that's discounted by her. And so I don't even know where to go with that. In the Encyclopedia Britannica, one finds, as the last word of science, that the antiquity of man is allowed to stretch only over tens of thousands of years. Footnote. See article Geology in Encyclopedia Britannica. Now again, that has been severely pushed back, right? We have evidence of man at, what's the name of it? Eridicu, right? I think is one of them. But like, even if you go back to this reference right here, Karnak, like Karnak is a wild story. If you are unfamiliar with Karnak, as far as I am aware, the largest stones ever placed intentionally by whoever is at Karnak. It's called the Trilithon. There are 3 of them, and we today could not do what was done then. They were carried hundreds of miles across terrible terrain to create this thing, right, at Karnak. We cannot, in modernity, repeat that. We today cannot move these stones at all. At all. I want to emphasize that. We cannot move this amount of weight. It is not something we have the possibility of doing with engines, gas-powered, diesel-powered engines, and hydraulics. We cannot move these things. It is not possible. And so, if indeed this is source material from someone who was there when Karnak and Stonehenge were built, then yeah, that should be taken at face value. But again, that is going to be exceedingly hard to predict or to show. And if we are talking about records prior to existence, that's just a hard sell. Now, our understanding of humanity has been pushed back closer to 100,000 years. I don't know that it really extends much past that for a variety of reasons, but we don't have the fossil records for it to say, right? And so, as far as I am aware, that is as far back as it is pushed. So, this tens of thousands of years, right, stretch only over tens of thousands of years, is pretty close to true to our current understanding. Now, it's not 10,000 years because, again, we have cities that old. There are many people who will disagree with that, but most of them believe that the Bible is true. And so there's that problem. Back to the text. It becomes evident that as these figures may be made to fluctuate between 10,000 and 100,000, therefore they mean very little, if anything, and only render still denser the darkness surrounding the question. Moreover, what matters is that science places the birth of man in the pre- or post-glacial drift. Again, that is going to be a severe problem because there have been several glacial periods. We are currently in an interglacial period, which has extended for an extremely long amount of time given the history of the planet. Most of the planet has been covered in ice most of the time of its existence, according to our scientific knowledge today. Again, the 12,000-year disaster cycle details those. If the pre- or post-glacial drift, if we are told at the same time that the so-called Ice Age is simply a long succession of ages which shaded without abrupt change of any kind into what is termed the human or recent period, the overlapping of geological periods having been the rule from the beginning of time. The latter rule only results in the still more puzzling, even if strictly scientific and correct information that, even today, man is contemporary with the Ice Age in the Alpine valleys and in the Finnmark. And again, here is something that most people don't know. During the glacial periods, there were still places on the Earth that were not glaciated. Most of those are around the equator, as it is currently oriented. But there are reasons to believe that that has changed over the years. We've detailed those before. The mammoth in the Arctic is one of the main ones. Like, that is a very good indicator that something changed over the course of time. Many of our interglacial periods are not easily explained. Right? There has to be an enormous investment of energy in order to melt the glaciers. And that is not accounted for by the current understanding of the solar cycle. It is, however, accounted for by the 12,000-year disaster cycle. And so, man has repeatedly been part of a glacial period. I don't know that there was ever any period where the entirety of the Earth was encapsulated in ice, at least in relative modernity, which is since humans were existent. Thus, had it not been for the lessons taught by the secret doctrine, and even by exoteric Hinduism and its traditions, we should be left to this day to float in perplexed uncertainty between the indefinite ages of one school of science, the tens of thousands of years of the other, and the 6,000 years of the Bible interpreters. This last one is untrue, right? I will even go so far as to say, not just almost certainly untrue, which is what I was about to say, but pretty emphatically untrue. This is one of the several reasons why, with all the respect due to the conclusions of the men of learning of our modern day, we are forced to ignore them all in such questions of prehistoric antiquity. That's fine, I dismiss you just as easily. Modern geology and anthropology must, of course, disagree with our views, yes, but occultism will find as many weapons against these two sciences as it has against astronomical and physical theories, in spite of Mr. Lang's assurances that, footnote 3, see his Modern Science and Modern Thought. In chronological calculations of this sort concerning older and later formations, there is no theory, and they are based on positive facts limited only by a certain possible amount of error either way. Occultism will prove, scientific confessions in hand, that geology is very much in error, and very often even more so than astronomy. That, unfortunately for Mrs. Blavatsky, did not prove to be true. In this very passage by Mr. Lang, which gives to geology preeminence for correctness over astronomy, we find a passage in flagrant contradiction to the admissions of the best geologists themselves. Says the author, in short, the conclusions of geology, at any rate up to the Silurian period, footnote 4, to the Silurian period as regards mollusks and animal life, granted. But what do they know of man? At any rate, up to the Silurian period, when the present order of things was fairly inaugurated, are approximate. Truly so, facts, and not theories, while the astronomical conclusions are theories based on data so uncertain that while in some cases they give results incredibly short, in others they give results almost incredibly long. After which, the reader is advised that the safest course seems to be to assume that geology really proves the duration of the present order of things to have been somewheres over 100 million of years, as astronomy gives an enormous, though unknown, time in the past and to come in the future for the birth, growth, maturity, decline, and death of the solar system, of which our Earth is a small planet now passing through the habitable phase. Judging from past experience, we do not entertain the slightest doubt that, once called upon to answer the absurd, unscientific, and preposterous claims of exoteric and esoteric Aryan chronology, the scientists of, the results incredibly short, in example, only 15 million years, and the scientist who would require 600 million years, together with those who accept Mr. Huxley's figures of 1 billion years, since sedimentation began in Europe, world life, would all be as dogmatic one as the other. Nor would they fail to remind the occultist and the Brahmin that it is the modern men of science who alone represent exact science, whose duty it is to fight inaccuracy and superstition. The earth is passing through the habitable phase only for the present order of things, and as far as our present mankind is concerned with its actual coats of skin and phosphorus for bones and brain. We are ready to concede the 100 millions of years offered by geology, since we are taught that our present physical mankind, or the Vaiva Sabata, humanity, began only 18 million years ago. But geology has no facts to give us for the duration of geological periods, as we have shown, no more indeed than astronomy. And again, that has changed. Right? We do indeed now have duration of geological periods. The authentic letter from Mr. W. Pengelly, FRS, quoted elsewhere, says that it is, at present and perhaps always will be, impossible to reduce even approximately geological time into years or even into millenniums. Wrong. And having never hitherto excavated a fossil of man, or any other, than the present form, what does geology know of him? It has traced zones or strata, and with these, primordial zoological life down to the Silurian. When it has, in the same way, traced man down to his primordial protoplasmic form, then we will admit that it may know something of primordial man. If it is not very material to the bearings of modern scientific discovery on modern thought, whether man has existed in state of constant, though slow progression, for the last 50,000 years, a period of 15 millions, or for the last 500,000 years of a period of 150 millions. Modern science, as Mr. S. Lang tells his readers, it is very much so for the claims of the occultists, unless the latter show that it is a possibility, if not a perfect certainty, that man lived 18 millions of years ago. The secret doctrine might as well have remained unwritten. An attempt must, therefore, be made in this direction, and it is our modern geologists and men of science, generally, who will be brought to testify to this fact in the third part of this volume. Meanwhile, and notwithstanding the fact that Hindu chronology is constantly represented by the Orientalist as a fiction based on no actual computation, footnote, Wilson's translation of Vishnu Purana. And I am saying the same thing because so far we do not have any reason to believe that it is an actual computation, right? Yes, they are doing math, but we have no reason to give any credence whatsoever to the terms of the math problem. Like, we have not seen any evidentiary reasoning for that. Now, you can make the argument for the grand cycle of the precession of equinoxes, but it doesn't add up the same. As a fiction based on no actual computation, but simply a childish boasting, it is nevertheless often twisted out of recognition to make it yield to and fit in with Western theories. Now, I do not attribute it to childish boasting. I attribute it to speculation done in good faith, but that doesn't mean it's correct. No figures have ever been more meddled with and tortured than the famous 432, followed by ciphers of the Yugas and Mahayugas. As the whole cycle of prehistoric events, such as the evolution and transformation of races and the extreme antiquity of man, hangs upon the said chronology, it becomes extremely important to check it by other existing calculations. If the Eastern chronology is rejected, we shall at least have the consolation of proving that no other, whether the figures of science or of the churches, is one whit more reliable. As Professor Max Muller expresses it, it is often as useful to prove what a thing is not as to show what it may be. And once we succeed in pointing out the fallacies of both Christian and scientific computations, by allowing them a fair chance of comparison with our chronology, neither of the two will have a reasonable ground to stand upon in pronouncing the esoteric figures less reliable than its own. And again, you are simply incorrect. Now, science has done it. The church, no. Granted, they were wrong. It was not 6,000 years. It is not 6,000 years. It is, however, fairly well attributed to science. We may here refer the reader to our earlier work, Isis Unveiled, which we have done in its entirety, Volume 1, page 32, for some remarks concerning the figures which were cited a few pages back. Today, a few more facts may be added to the information there given, which is already known to every Orientalist. The sacredness of the cycle of 4,320, with additional ciphers, lies in the fact that the figures which compose it, taken separately or joined in various combinations, are each and all symbolical of the greatest mysteries in nature. Indeed, whether one takes 4 separately, or the 3 by itself, or the 2 together making 7, or again the 3 added together and yielding 9, all these numbers have their application in the most sacred and occult things, and record the workings of nature in her eternally periodical phenomena. They are never-erring, perpetually recurring numbers, unveiling to him who studies the secrets of nature a truly divine system, an intelligent plan in cosmogony, which results in natural cosmic divisions of times, seasons, invisible influences, astronomical phenomena with their action and reaction on terrestrial and even moral nature, on birth, death, and growth, on health and disease. All these natural events are based and depend upon cyclical processes in the cosmos itself, producing periodic agencies which, acting from without, affect the earth and all that lives and breathes on it, from one end to the other of any manvantara. Causes and effects are esoteric, exoteric, and endo-exoteric, so to say. In Isis Unveiled, we wrote that which we now repeat. We are at the bottom of a cycle, and evidently in a transitory state. Plato divides the intellectual progress of the universe during every cycle into fertile and barren periods. In the sublunary region, the spheres of the various elements remain eternally in perfect harmony with the divine nature. He says, but their parts, owing to a too close proximity to earth, and their commingling with the earthly, which is matter, and therefore the realm of evil, are sometimes according and sometimes contrary to divine nature. When those circulations, which Eliphas Levi calls currents of the astral light in the universal ether, which contains in itself every element, take place in harmony with the divine spirit, our earth and everything pertaining to it enjoys a fertile period. The occult powers of plants, animals, and minerals magically sympathize with the superior natures, and the divine soul of man is in perfect intelligence with these inferior ones. But during the barren periods, the latter lose their magic sympathy, and the spiritual sight of the majority of mankind is so blinded as to lose every notion of the superior powers of its own divine spirit. We are in a barren period, the 18th century, during which the malignant fever of skepticism broke out so irrepressibly, has entailed unbelief as a hereditary disease upon the 19th. The divine intellect is veiled in man. His animal brain alone philosophizes. And philosophizing alone, how can it understand the soul doctrine? In order not to break the thread of the narrative, we shall give some striking proofs of these cyclic laws in Part 2, proceeding, meanwhile, with our explanations of the geological and racial cycles. And that is going to bring us to the end of Nature Unaided Fails. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. It is important to speculate what is from what isn't. It is important to differentiate between speculation and fact. Speculation is fine. We can speculate on anything as long as we maintain that it is speculation and not try to assert it as fact. Several things that she asserts as fact is due simply to not having knowledge yet. If she would have lived 40 years later, this book would have been written differently, because several of the things that she brings up contention with have been proven. Ice cores, geological cores, fossil beds, even carbon dating, although that is extremely inaccurate, have led to a greater understanding than what she had. We can, indeed, date back at least the organization of men into cohesive units called cities and civilization. We can go back to Uruk and the various cities in the Middle East, right? The Asiatic, Western Asiatic areas. And we could find civilization dating back at least 10,000 years, some of them 12 to 14,000 years. And that is the same and true in other places, right? The mountains of Peru hold buildings that are at least 10,000 years old. And so many of the things that she believes as true are simply not. They are things that, through the lens of time and history, the discoveries of science, we have a better understanding of. And because we have a better understanding, I am trying to clarify, right? None of this speculation about the beginnings of man really make a difference. It would be great to know, but it doesn't really change anything in your day-to-day life, right? Knowing whether man was created 6,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, or 1,000,000 years ago does not really change anything in your day-to-day life. They are the realm of speculation, not factual actuality. I don't know that we will ever factually identify a common source for humanity. I don't necessarily believe that there was one. And so most of the things which is speculated about just needs to remain speculation. And that is an important designation. All of this is great thought exercises. I like this, right? Many of the things that are speculation, I believe. But even though I believe them, they have to remain speculation. So hopefully I brought a little bit of clarity about the things that we do know as opposed to the things that we didn't before. And if you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was stated today, drop it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments below. Or if you want to remind me about the several things I need reminding about. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even a membership. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.